A Thomas Promise. The island of Sodor was, as always, a very busy place. Engines chuffed to and fro, pulling passengers and goods with cheerful whistles and puffs. At Farquhar Sheds, Thomas and Percy were feeling particularly full of steam. They had been given a new timetable on their branch line, which meant they had to run some goods trains more quickly than usual. "See, Percy," puffed Thomas, bustling about. "This shows how really useful we are, faster than ever." Percy, a cheeky green tank engine, agreed. "Yes, we can show those big engines a thing or two about speed." Toby, the wise old tram engine, watched them with a knowing look. "Speed is all in good, Thomas and Percy, but punctuality and safety are much more important. Rushing only leads to trouble." But Thomas and Percy were too excited to listen. All morning they bustled along the branch line, trying to see who could pull their trucks the fastest, sometimes leaving little clouds of steam behind them. Their drivers and firemen kept them in order, but the two young engines loved to show off when they thought what no one important was watching. Meanwhile, Edward, the kindly old blue engine, was working hard on the main line. He was pulling a long train of heavy goods wagons, delivering important supplies to the docks. He was a steady and reliable engine, never rushing, always making sure his loads arrived safely. As Edward slowly rumbled along a section of track that ran parallel to the branch line, Thomas came speeding by with a train of empty trucks. "Look at me, Edward," whistled Thomas, trying to sound important. "Faster than ever." Edward smiled kindly. "Steady, Thomas. There's no need for such haste." But Thomas just puffed harder, wanting to show off. Percy, not far behind, saw Thomas and decided to try and catch up. He too sped up, making his trucks rattle and clatter noisily. Edward, focused on his heavy load, was suddenly startled by the two engines racing past him, creating a gust of wind and kicking up dust. He wobbled on the rails. "Oh dear," he groaned as his wheels slipped. With a shudder and a loud crash, one of his trucks derailed, spilling its contents across the tracks. Thomas and Percy heard the crash and looked back, their proud puffs turning into gasps of horror. Edward stood sadly beside his derailed truck, looking cross and rather shaken. Soon, the Fat Controller arrived in his blue car, looking very stern indeed. He surveyed the scene with a deep frown. "Thomas, Percy, what is the meaning of this? You know better than to race and cause such disruption." Thomas and Percy looked down at their buffers, feeling very ashamed. We were just showing off, sir," mumbled Thomas. "And now Edward's train is delayed and his truck is damaged," boomed the Fat Controller. "This is not being really useful engines. Edward, are you hurt?" "Only my pride, sir," sighed Edward. "But this load must get to the docks on time." The Fat Controller stroked his chin. This will require some careful shunting to clear, and Edward will need to go to the steamworks for a checkup. We need an engine to take half of Edward's remaining trucks to the docks and another to take the other half." He looked pointedly at Thomas and Percy. Thomas felt a knot of guilt in his boiler. "Please, sir," he puffed bravely, "I'll take Edward's trucks. All of them. It was my fault." The Fat Controller considered. "You cannot take all of them, Thomas. They are too heavy for one engine, but I appreciate your willingness to help. You may take half. For the other half, Diesel." A sleek black Diesel, who had been shunting quietly in a nearby siding, rumbled forward. Diesel was often grumpy and thought very highly of himself. He had a sneer on his face. "Yes, sir." "Diesel, you will take the other half of Edward's train to the docks," the Fat Controller instructed. "And Thomas, you are to work together. No more foolish showing off. Do I have your promise, Thomas?" Thomas looked at the damaged truck and then at Edward's sad face. "Yes, sir, a Thomas promise," he said firmly, determined to make things right. Soon the derailed truck was rerailed and Edward was gently helped away towards the steamworks. Thomas was coupled up to half of the goods train and Diesel to his. Both engines felt the weight of the trucks, but Thomas felt the weight of his promise even more. "Well, little tank engine," Diesel sneered, revving his engine, "let's see if that Thomas promise can keep you from being left behind. I, Diesel, am much more efficient with heavy loads." Thomas felt a surge of annoyance. He wanted to prove he could be responsible, but Diesel's taunts pricked at his pride. He saw Diesel began to pull away, his engine rumbling confidently. For a moment, Thomas felt the urge to put on a burst of speed and race alongside him, just like he had done with Percy. But then, the image of Edward's derailed truck and the Fat Controller's stern face flashed in his mind. And most importantly, he remembered his Thomas promise. He had promised to be careful, and a promise was a promise. "No, Thomas," he whispered to himself, taking a deep puff. "Not this time." Thomas started slowly, pulling his half of the heavy goods train steadily. He chuffed along, keeping a careful eye on the signals and listening to the rhythm of his own pistons. Diesel quickly pulled ahead, soon disappearing around a bend with a triumphant honk. Thomas continued his journey at a sensible pace. He thought of Edward and how dependable he always was. He thought of Toby and his quiet wisdom. This was how a really useful engine behaved, not showing off, but by doing the job properly. He passed through quiet fields and small stations. His driver kept his fire just right, and his fireman watched the water gauge carefully. The trucks behind him rumbled contentedly, not rattling or bumping. Thomas felt a different kind of satisfaction growing inside him. The satisfaction of doing a job well, without any fuss or foolishness. After a while, Thomas rounded a curve and saw something ahead. It was Diesel. He was at a signal, waiting. He looked rather impatient, grumbling to himself. "What's the matter, Diesel?" puffed Thomas, pulling up smoothly beside him. Diesel looked cross. "This signal, it's red. Been red for ages, wasting my valuable time. This wouldn't happen on the mainland, you know." Thomas smiled. "Perhaps they're just making sure the line is clear, Diesel. Safety first, as the Fat Controller always says." Just then the signal dropped to green with a satisfying clunk. Diesel revved his engine impatiently and shot off with a cloud of exhaust. Thomas, however, waited a moment longer, ensuring his trucks were perfectly settled, and then followed steadily. Soon both engines arrived at the bustling docks. Cranes were swinging, ships were being loaded, and other engines were shunting wagons. Diesel quickly shunted his trucks into their designated siding with a series of bumps and grumbles. He finished first, naturally, and let out a triumphant toot. Thomas, meanwhile, carefully shunted his own half of the train, placing each truck precisely where it needed to be. He took his time, making sure everything was neat and tidy. When he was finished, the dock manager came over, looking pleased. "Excellent work, Thomas," he said. "These supplies are exactly on time, and look how carefully you've handled them. Everything's perfectly placed. Well done." Thomas puffed with a quiet satisfaction. He might not have been the fastest, but he had been the most careful, and that felt even better than winning a race. Diesel, overhearing the compliment, merely snorted and rumbled away to find more work, annoyed that Thomas had received praise. Later that afternoon, Thomas and Percy were back at Farquhar Sheds, resting after a busy day. Percy was still thinking about the morning's mishap. "I'm still sorry about Edward, Thomas," he said quietly. "Me too, Percy," replied Thomas. "But I made a Thomas promise not to show off any more, and I kept it. It felt much better to be careful." Just then, they heard a familiar gentle whistle. Along the line, steaming steadily towards the sheds, was Edward. He looked as good as new. The Fat Controller arrived in his blue car once more. He looked at Thomas, then at Percy, and finally at Edward. "I am pleased to see you all safe and sound," he said. "And Thomas, I heard about your careful work today. A promise kept is a truly useful thing. Perhaps now both you and Percy have learnt that being sensible and reliable is far more important than showing off." Thomas and Percy looked at each other. They knew he was right. From that day on, Thomas tried very hard to remember his Thomas promise. While he was still a cheeky engine, he learned that being truly useful meant being responsible, and that a promise once made must always be kept.